Yes.
Thank you. Okay, here you go.
There we go. All right. Since it's 7:02 p.m. and we have a time limit for this one, let's get started. I'm sure others will join as they when they can. But in any case, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's informational session about the Madison Meadows Outfall Restoration Project. My name is Sam Kang, and I'm a staff member for Supervisor Kathy Smith, who represents the Sully District on the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. Please note that this meeting will be recorded to allow for future viewing. I'm going to help us get started here before handing the microphone over to Supervisor Smith for her remark, and then to our stormwater staff who have prepared a presentation to address your most frequently asked questions. As I said previously, we do have a strict 1-hour time limit for this call, and we are anticipating a much larger audience than the first session. So for the sake of efficiency, if you think of any questions during the call, please enter them in the chat, and we will try to address as many as possible following staff's presentation. And if we get to 8 p.m. and there are still questions remaining, I will try to get you whatever additional information is requested in the coming weeks. And then to help with the audio quality, I would ask that everyone keep their microphones deactivated for the session. And then the next slide here is going to show names and positions of county staff and project consultants who are joining tonight's session. And this is just to give you a sense of who is here tonight and who have some of the people who have been involved with this project. So from that point, before I turn it over to Supervisor Smith, I'd like to go over some basic concepts about stormwater so that we're all starting from the same place. I think establishing the bigger picture before we get specific about this project might help provide context for its place in the grand scheme of things. So again, this is not coming from an expert. You will hear from the experts following this section, but this is just to make sure that we're on the same page about what stormwater is. And for that explanation, rain that has landed on the ground is referred to as stormwater, and all stormwater in Fairfax County eventually ends up in the Occoquan and Potomac rivers, as well as the Chesapeake Bay. And in nature, the vast majority of the stormwater is absorbed through the soil before being released slowly into waterways. And this is nature's way of organically protecting water quality as it purifies the stormwater before it enters water bodies. However, areas of human activity are often covered by impermeable surfaces, such as pavements, which don't allow for stormwater to seep into the ground. And this causes most of the stormwater to flow downhill towards waterways, picking up pollutants like fertilizers, pesticides, sediment, and more. So in summary, human activity increases the amount of stormwater runoff produced during rain, the types of contaminants it carries, and then the speed with which it flows into water bodies. And one real-world example of this is can be seen in how swimming in the Potomac River has been prohibited since 1971. Although the good news is that work by stormwater professionals have gotten that river to a much better condition today. So in areas of Fairfax County, the job of slowing down and filtering stormwater that is meant to be done by Mother Nature has to be supplemented in other ways, because that's the right thing to do, and also because there are federal and state regulations that require this of localities such as Fairfax County. And this is done through the storm drainage system, which is a network of structures, channels, and pipes that slow down the speed of stormwater flow and reduce the amount of pollutants it contains before it reaches our waterways. And this infrastructure needs to be regularly inspected and maintained to ensure that things are working properly. And the project we're here to discuss tonight is a part of that effort. And we will soon hear more about it from staff. But first, I will hand the microphone over to Supervisor Smith for her remark.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight and also for reaching out to my office with your questions. It's important that we have a chance for you to talk with staff and find out answers. So properly managing stormwater is one of the core responsibilities of local government. and all of the regulations that are in place regarding stormwater management point to its importance. Human activity has an impact on the natural environment, and we have to do our best to offset that impact as much as possible. Infrastructure like the one we are discussing tonight contribute to cleaner waterways and improved water quality for everyone. At the same time, it's also important to provide you with all the information about the project. I hope tonight's session will help everyone understand what has been planned and why. The team that is on this call have coordinated numerous stormwater maintenance projects to great success, and the project's goal is not to make things worse, but better. These projects are planned to help stormwater infrastructure perform up to the current standard and to leave project sites in better condition than before. And with that, I will turn it over to county staff so that they can begin their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Take that as a yes. So our community meeting agenda, we're going to go over the background, make sure that we're all clear on where the project location is. We're going to go over the existing conditions, the project timeline, our design, what you can expect during construction, reforestation, some example restorations, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. So the project extent is shown in orange on the vicinity map on this slide. It's north of Vale Road, east of Clark's Landing Drive, west of Clark's Landing Park, and south of Timberline Drive. The project starts at a gully just upstream of what we're calling Tributary 1, which is coming off of our storm drainage easement off of Madison Meadows Lane. And the extents go down to Tributary 2, which is coming off of our proposed access and easement off of Timberlake Court. This channel continues downstream into a pond that has been sedimented in before it crosses underneath Timberline Drive. The project boundaries on this location map again show that the extents go from upstream of Tributary 1 along the main channel downstream to Tributary 2. There's some bump outs where we have staging and stockpile areas planned, and the entire project ties out upstream of the playground on the Park Authority property here. Here are two photos. The one on the right represents Tributary 1. This is a eroded outfall. We got Fairfax County Maintenance and Stormwater Management Group got a service request in January 2021 to come and address this outfall. You can see this private septic line that crosses in front of our channel that is now exposed. But if you look on the left, this upstream, this is the head cut or the gully that is formed upstream of Tributary 1. And so if anyone, I like to use the example of Niagara Falls, but an important thing to keep in mind is that erosion kind of works its way backwards. So similar to Niagara Falls, how you have the water running over the falls, eventually over time, Niagara Falls has kind of moved backwards. The location of the actual falls has moved backwards along the course of the river. In this case, a gully or a nick point or a head cut, these are all terms we might use to describe this upstream point of erosion. This will over time continue to move upstream within the channel. So the photo on the left here is taken in the main channel at the upstream end of our project. This is where we are proposing to put in a structure to start the project. And you can see it's almost as tall as Oshanafi. So we know that when we went out to scope this, we knew that simply correcting the erosion in this tributary would not address the erosion in the main channel. That erosion had already migrated upstream of this tributary. Here's another photo. On the left, you can see Oceanophy again. There's the height, kind of the erosion at that crossing of that septic line. And on those on the left, on the right, you can see the tributary coming in from the left and the main channel on the right. So the channel on the right goes upstream, the channel on the left goes downstream. You can see where the channel has already deepened and widened, and we have a tree that has leaned and fallen into the stream channel. So we've gotten the question, why don't we just address the tributary without tying into the main channel? And so we can talk about a little bit more with the design plan that it's not going to be as effective of a design to tie down because you have 5 feet, 6 feet without raising the entire main channel as well. Before we move on to talk and look at the existing condition of the main channel, the septic line that's crossing, you can also notice that there's 2 size pipes. So in theory, the larger pipe is supposed to be a protective outer casing for the inner pipe, but you can see that that erosion has extended far beyond that, and so that puts that private infrastructure at risk. Here's 2 photos taken from the main channel. The erosion in the main channel is not necessarily visible from the top of the bank or on the left picture where Jack is standing. But if you get down into the channel, you can see that there's evidence that the channel has downcut and that it is starting to widen so that it's eroding out the soil underneath the bank. And John, do you want to maybe add some more about kind of channel morphology?
Yeah, so kind of the typical evolution of a stream is it will erode down until it hits a hard surface like bedrock or some sort of big substrate. And then once it hits that point, it will start over widening. And I think most of this channel has hit bedrock, and you can see on the picture on the left, it's starting to widen. It's eroding the banks out on the sides, and therefore causing the trees on the banks to become undercut and eventually fall in. Is that what you were looking for, Rachel?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
So just downstream of that, here's another example where the erosion, that widening, is causing that soil underneath and through the root balls of these trees to kind of erode up. So there's another nick point actually going through these root systems. This is now on the Park Authority property. This creates a tripping hazard and a safety hazard. So these conditions are fairly typical of the channel throughout. As we walk down a little bit farther, so Jack, John, and I all were there for scoping this project when we got the service request in. It opens up to a fairly wide area with no trees, no large diameter trees or understory trees that wouldn't be shown in the design plans. So as we were walking down and trying to scope this project, trying to figure out what would be the best course of action, this immediately looked like a great place to have a staging and stockpile area that would have limited impacts. On the left, there's a photo of I think this is a separate staging and stockpile area closer to tributary 1. As you walk down farther, this is just past a clump of trees from that staging stockpile area. This is where you have tributary 2, and you can see it's still eroded almost as deep as Oceanophy is tall. And then the end section of this is our closed storm drainage system. It outfalls here. That end structure has settled and is starting to fail. And so keeping in mind again that erosion moves backwards over time, if we were not to, if we did not restore this, that erosion would work backwards to kind of worsen the condition of that end wall and the pipe system, and then it would be more work and more cost to repair. So, Jack, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe the kind of the alternatives?
Yeah, so our office received a service request with regards to the Trib 1 back, like Rachel said, in early January 21. And our technician visited the site and did the initial investigation, and flags started, popping up that the condition was worse than just a simple maintenance project. So she elevated it to our team. We went out and visited with John Connolly and his team, who works for WSSI as our consultant, and we started walking the site and realized that the bigger issues were not just in Trib 1, and we started following the erosion downstream, found another culvert that was being impacted, and that's when we started looking at different alternatives. One being, do we just fix the tribs? It did not seem feasible just to fix the two tributaries based on the fact that we wouldn't have anything to tie to with how deeply incised the main channel between the two tribs were. And that's really what drove our scoping discussion during that meeting, and how we built the basis for the scope of work to complete the design.
So we've also got questions about our proposed access. So our planned access, kind of again, like Jack was saying, we walked the site, we saw this kind of open area for a good access with few impacts for staging and stockpile. There's also a kind of opened up, and there is a access and storm drainage easement through this entrance for the park property. We've talked with Park Authority about maintaining this path and keeping this open during construction. We'll protect, for safety reasons, we'll put up a 6-foot fence to separate pedestrian traffic from construction traffic. But overall, it's grassy. There would be no tree impacts. The alternative where we came in off of Tributary 1, we have storm drainage easement here, but you can see that it's developed. There'll be larger tree impacts and then more impacts to private property, as well as the private septic system. So right off of the bat, even just with scoping, like it was readily apparent that access off of Timberlake Court would be preferred, and we'd be down in that area repairing the end wall and Tributary 2 anyway, so it only made sense to have the same access through the entire project.
Yeah, so I would add to that, when we start talking about access, we look for areas where we have, existing easements and the land rights, and, what's going to be the least invasive to private property and impacting private property. In this case, we had Trib 2, which had failing infrastructure and significant erosion within Tributary 2, located in a storm drainage easement on Park Authority property. And from a feasibility standpoint, this was the most feasible option for us to use for access, and it got us to the stockpile area the least intrusive way possible, as well as we're going to be in this area working to make repairs to Trib 2.
So just a review of the timeline, their service request came in January 2021. That spring of 2021, Jack and I went out to scope it with Wetlands Studies. We negotiated the scope of that, signed a task order for them to start design in the late summer of 2021. Throughout the fall and winter, survey was completed, and the design commenced. We went back and forth with floodplain modeling to make sure that any impacts from the construction, the the extent of the floodplain, because we were raising it, if we're raising the water and widening it, that stayed within our county's floodplain easement. So once that checked out, the design was submitted to us. We received it in the spring of 2022. As our workload allowed, we reviewed that design. And in September of this year, Ashinafi and I went out in early September to review the design in the field. At that time, we made contact with 2 homeowners adjacent to the construction access, and we initiated conversations with them to reach out to get emails to start a community meeting. Through September, we also sent letters to the homeowners whose properties were either affected or like within the limits of disturbance or immediately adjacent to construction. One of that included reaching out to the Clark's Landing HOA. We did not hear back from the HOA, but we set up that community meeting. I think that was held on October 12th. The community meeting, after the community meeting, Ashinafi and I went back out and we hung a door tag and a card on the address on file for the community association. What we've learned now is that the HOA is defunct. It's not organized. So, you know, if I know there's been a lot of questions about outreach, so I just wanted to let you know it's never an intent not to reach out. My expectation was that we would hear back and we'd be having a similar presentation at a board meeting. So now we're having this presentation. I hope that, you know, this will answer a lot of questions that are out there. So throughout September and October, we also coordinated with Fairfax County Park Authority to update our notice of work permit with them for construction. We had already had one for the survey and the design. And now we're at the point where we have a construction task order in place, and we expect construction to start in January. So, Kyle, what's your current estimate for duration?
I think we had around 4 to 6 months, I believe, is what we had spoken about previously.
So that would put us into late spring, early summer. So more than likely that will push us into the fall for planting. If we have live stakes, those get planted in late winter, early spring.
Yes.
So throughout this whole process, this is a channel within Fairfax County Storm Drainage Easement. So it's part of our MS4 program where we do 5-year inspections. But we'll also be doing erosion sediment control inspections during construction. We've got a 1-year inspection and warranty on the plant material. And we have obligation to inspect for 3 years for our Army Corps permit. And then again, after that, it'll continue to be in our inventory of channels that we maintain under our MS4 permit. So it would have 5-year inspections throughout for perpetuity. So.
Rachel, you mentioned the construction contract. There were several questions around the project and whether it was an open solicitation for construction. That's not a requirement for us. We actually we do solicitations for this type of construction. We a purchase order contract every 5 years. So we've had the contractor Res Environmental under contract now for about 4.5 years per the existing contractor, and able to do individual tasks off of that existing 5-year contract. So hopefully that clears up the questions around an open solicitation.
So one other thing that I wanted to point out was that in the spring of 2022, you know, my staff and I got together and we we have a backlog of projects. We got together and we prioritized them. And this project, we intentionally decided to fast track compared to others that may have come in earlier or been started earlier because of the potential impacts to the private and the public infrastructure in the tributaries. So this whole time scale is very fast, and that was in a large part intentional. So our hope was to, we know which projects are contracted crews are on right now, and we have an estimate of when they'd be done construction. So our goal, in order to kind of address that risk to that infrastructure, is to kind of have that lined up for that crew to move on to this project next. That would be our way of, tackling projects with the greater need earlier. So I'm going to hand it over to Irini and John to talk about the design. Here are some photos that kind of represent what you might see on the design plans, on the engineering plans. So the channel bottom is going to be reinforced bed material. So it's kind of a mix of gravel, boulders, cobble, topsoil. And then there's other what we call structures, might include boulder pools and step pools, which are made out of imbricated or stackable boulders. And we'll let Irini and John again talk to that. We have several structures that incorporate logs, so a lot of the trees that may come down, we try to reincorporate into the designs, reforest with the native plants, and then as well we have like the end walls that we're going to be replacing. One end wall. All right, so Irini.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, this is the grading plan from the plan set. So in the middle of this map, you can see the main channel. Right now it's flowing left to right as it is oriented on the map. And tributaries 1 and 2 are flowing top to bottom. Tributary 1 on the left, 2 on the right. The main channel length is about 650 feet. Tributary 1 is about 50 feet and tributary 2 is about 100. So as Rachel said earlier, we are starting the restoration of the main channel all the way to the left. That is where the head cut that you saw in the photo is. And that is where we're putting the structure. This is a step pool, like you saw in the previous slide, made out of imbricated rock. And we are moving downstream and raising the channel. In some areas, we're raising it about 6 feet. This allows for water to access the floodplain more frequently, and therefore the velocities of the water will go down, and therefore the erosive forces won't be as strong, and the banks can remain in place, so you wouldn't have all this sediment moving downstream and depositing further down.
Hey, Irini, I'm sorry to interrupt, but one of the residents is having trouble getting a frame of reference. Can you just point out a couple streets or a different landmark? That,
oh, yes, of course.
Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. I didn't see the chat. If we look down here, this is Timberlake Court. So this is where the construction access is proposed, the entrance. And if you move down, there is this match line that corresponds to this match line. So Timberlake
Rachel,
Court would
So
be-
I can't actually see the cursor.
I think
Can
it
you
has
see
to
on
be
my
Rachel.
screen?
Yeah, Rachel, I think
Okay.
you're going to have to be the one navigating. Sorry, everybody. And actually, it would
Okay.
help if you don't mind if you could zoom in. I don't know if you can do that in presentation mode. Can you zoom in?
Jack, do you have
Probably
the plans up? Can you share
Yeah,
your
I can.
screen?
I'll share real quick.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Real quick to answer the heck. Okay. At the bottom of the screen would be Linda Marie running parallel to the channel. Here is the home at the end of Madison Meadows Lane. And then over here is Timberline Court coming into the park, just to get your orientation.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I hope this is clear now. So as I was saying, this Moving downstream, we can see there are multiple structures, step pools and boulder pools, as well as log structures. Those are the Ys that you see and the straight lines that you see on the bottom half of the restoration. And in addition to that, we've got some step pools at the upstream end of the restoration for both tributaries coming right out of the pipe. And we are also proposing replacing the head wall, as Rachel said, on tributary 2. The shaded path that you see is the temporary access, and the dotted hatch are the proposed staging and stockpile areas. I believe we can move on to the profile. This is the main channel. So as you can see, we are raising the main channel quite a bit upstream. It has been severely eroded downwards in the past. So we are raising this back up. The dashed line that you see on the bottom is the existing channel right now. And the darker line on the top is the proposed grade that we are proposing. And you can see all the wooded structures and the step pools all the way through. If we move to the next page, there should be the profiles for the 2 tributaries. So tributary 1 is the one that has the exposed sanitary line that you can see over there. And you can see how severely eroded the channel is right now. And we're proposing about a foot of cover with the design. On the right is
And there was one comment about only doing the 2 tribs and not doing the main channel in between. To get this trib to a stable condition without doing the main channel, we would never be able to get cover over the sewer lateral or the septic line. Because we wouldn't be tying to a stable condition. So by raising the main channel, in this area 5 to 6 feet, that's given us something to tie this tributary in at a stable condition at a higher elevation and gets the cover over that sewer line that we need.
Exactly. And on the right is the proposed profile for the for tributary 2. I want to point out that the hatch that you're seeing at the top that looks like little rocks, this is the reinforced bed that Rachel pointed out before in the photos. So you can see how we have a thick layer of that in the design.
Irene, can you just discuss a little bit the channel size? I think it's 10 foot wide.
Yeah. The main channel will be 10 foot wide by 1 foot deep, and the tributaries are smaller. They are 6 foot wide by 0.6 feet deep.
And I think a lot of the existing conditions now are 10 to 12, maybe 10 to 14 feet wide and 7 to 8 feet deep. So it's going to be a huge difference as far as safety and stuff goes too.
Looked like there was a question about coverage over the sewer line and whether that we would expect it to erode again. No, I think we have confidence in the design approach, and by using this reinforced bed mix, expectations and really experience lends itself that we don't expect there to be any erosion with the bed mix, and that's why the type of bed mix is sized appropriately to withstand the shear stresses that you would expect to see in the runoff leaving the end of that pipe, the storm pipe.
And Jack, can I just do some plain language in there? So in case you're not familiar with the terminology of the bed mix, the native soils that are sitting there, the water has gotten fast enough due to continued upstream development, more impervious area, et cetera. So it just wasn't sufficient to hold the energy that's coming at it from all that increased water flow. And so the reinforced bed mix has heavier and more stable material, and so it is able to withstand more forces.
One other aspect of the design that will be protective is the length of the restoration of the main channel. post-construction, there'll be several pools and different structures that would dissipate energy throughout the main channel. So again, if you're thinking that erosion moves backwards, at some point it's probably started much closer to the downstream pond and worked its way up. We have photos that show that downstream pond by Timberline. That outfall structure was sedimented in even as like 2003. So that tells us that that channel had been eroding and had moved backwards. And so we wouldn't expect that to happen again. We have all these structures in between, along that channel and ahead of that tributary, ahead of that septic line. So restoring that main channel actually gives more protection to that private infrastructure and the tributaries as well. Okay, thank you, Irini.
Yes.
So next up is what to expect during construction. So let me share my screen again. Start from the beginning. Kyle, you want to talk a little bit about what equipment you have on site?
Sure. Our normal equipment package for all of our crews, we'll have on-road dump trucks, bringing materials, whether it be rock, mulch, or fill to bring the channel up. We also have off-road dump trucks in the middle photo there to transport material around within the job site. We normally have a few different size excavators as well, helping place the material. We will also have a skid steer on site to move deck mats and kind of just general movement throughout the site. So these are kind of the main things you'll see on site while we're there.
Thanks, Kyle. Our construction access will consist of this deck matting. We'll have limits, fencing around the limits throughout construction. Even our staging and stockpile areas where there are tree roots to protect will have the deck mats down. Where we do cross over asphalt or curb for driveways, or we take pre-construction photos, we document the condition, and then we have contracts to repair any damage post-construction. So we can address the trees a bit more with the questions. Wanted on the design plans, we do have all the trees that are slated to be removed, kind of highlighted with the X's. Some of these you saw before. Here's some additional photos where you can see that they're being undercut and leaning. These are some of the trees that are being removed. Others are in poor health. So these are 3 of the trees that are slated to be removed for construction access upstream of the stockpile area.
And I might add to that, the trees being proposed, they're not really being proposed just to get the access path in. They're really being proposed to be removed because of the close proximity to the channel and the grading that's going to take place and impacting the critical root structure of those existing trees that are right at the top of bank of the existing channel.
That's correct. Good point. So these trees along the staging and stockpile here are both in our proposed access, but also need to be removed because raising the channel and the grading and the construction of these structures would get into their critical root zones. But there will remain mature tree canopy on either side of the construction limits, both on the top of this drawing towards Timberlane Court and the bottom along Linda Marie. We also have a tree save areas, and we've walked the site and we've identified a few more trees that we can try to save. So we can talk about that later with Q&A. After construction, we have a comprehensive revegetation plan. Jack, do you want to talk a little bit about, or John, you want to talk about the planting?
Yeah, I can jump
I'll
in
defer
there.
to John.
I can't remember exactly what species. I know we have a palette of about 25 early successional, later successional, and then shrubs and like koa slope species or stream edge species like willows and dogwoods. So we plant a variety. We plant small stock. I know a lot of people are disappointed when they hear we're planting 1 gallon size container. But this is more of a reforestation project. If we went in and planted a whole bunch of like landscape B&B trees, that would require a lot of maintenance. And typically there's poor survival on doing that too. So I think overall we're planting at a density of like 750 stems per acre, which is essentially a tree every 6 feet. And that accommodates like natural mortality as well as deer browse and things like that. I see a question about the maintenance of the trees. There really shouldn't be any maintenance. We're planting at a high density, so we just let Mother Nature do her thing, once we put them in the ground. Is that the whole question?
It was about deer browse, and I think we addressed that by planting such a large quantity of stems, as John mentioned.
Yeah, John, this is Neil Cronin. John, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Neil.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, John. Hey, so before we leave the trees here, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was that there's when you identify the trees that are in your tree survey are 12 inches in diameter or larger, correct?
That is correct, yep.
So the total of 40 trees is 40 trees that are 12 inches in diameter or larger that are to be removed.
That is correct,
Is
yep.
that correct? Yeah. So my question is, if you look, and it's particularly obvious now that the leaves have dropped on the larger trees, that there's a lot of native hollies, there's dogwoods, there's redbuds in there. What would be your estimate of how many of those there are for each of the large 40 trees that are being removed, that will also some of these understory trees that'll be removed? The reason I ask is I'm trying to get at a total number because I
No, I
suspect there's
get it.
probably 1 or 2 understory trees for every large one, which gets the
Rachel,
numbers
could you
from.
go back to is now the good time to answer this, or I can answer
Yeah.
it now, it doesn't matter to me. Okay. Can you go back to the photo of the proposed staging area? That'd be a good reference. So we just walked it the other day to kind of take a harder look at the trees, and it was part of the process I explained in the first meeting. Like, we do the initial design, we put X's on the trees we believe we're going to impact to the point that need to be removed, and then we go back out there in the field with the contractor, the whole team, and we assess things. Do we need that access? Can we use the channel for access? So we did that. It was just the other day or last week. To get a better idea of what we could save. And at that point in time, I knew this was going to be a question. We took a look around, and to be honest with you, there wasn't that many small trees. There were some hollies that need to go that were along the stream channel or access, but the picture on the right shows the staging area. And actually those hollies on the right of that photo are Japanese holly, which are invasive. But I think they're outside of our limits anyway. We were going to pull in the limits, so it still left that screen specifically for you and your neighbors there. But there really wasn't that many. It wasn't that dense. And almost Jack and I looked at each other and we were like, why is there nothing growing in this area? And I don't know if there was some building or something there before, but it was kind of weird how there was nothing but invasive stilt grass. I hate to say stilt grass, but the whole thing was just stilt grass there. So I would say in general, the condition of the forested area through there It's going to be in a lot better shape after we do our work and replant, not just from the water standpoint, but the diversity within the forest is going to be really good. And I think, I'm not sure if we mentioned the seed mix too. The seed mix we use as, all sorts of different wildflowers and, native trees and shrubs in that mix too. So also from like a pollinator standpoint, there will be some wildflowers that will grow throughout that area. I don't
John,
know
there
if
was
I
a
answered your question directly.
Yeah, it's really hard to get a handle on what that number is because 40 sounds like a big number. Anybody that hears that reacts
Yeah,
to it. And
but the good news is, I think on our walk the other day, we actually took that 40 number and we believe we'll be able, by making some, we'll call them red line markups to our plan, and actually get that number down closer to a 28, which again is going to be predominantly about 95% tulip trees, which seems to be the most dominant species of trees throughout this stretch of forested area. But there was a question in the chat about it would be good to know that all trees that are being removed are absolutely necessary. And I think this the goal of this project is to be an ecological, environmentally friendly project, with the understanding that we're going to have temporary impacts during construction. And our goal is to not decimate the forest and take out every single tree within the limits of disturbance. I actually, when we get out here and start doing these projects and looking at each tree individually, we do our best to try to save as many trees as possible. And I think we'll be able to actually save about a dozen of those larger tree species that we, had originally called to be removed. And the number of the smaller stuff, Neil, there was a lot of invasive that would be removed, which we see that as a benefit for the area. And then there was a good amount of smaller cherries that were within the limits of the project that we'd be removing. But I think, like John said, with the diversity of the planting palette that we're going back in with, I think we're going to greatly improve the overall forested area throughout this channel corridor.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really hard. I've done a lot of these presentations over the years. Sometimes it's really hard to show somebody on a screen, that the current condition of a tree being undercut and things like that on the stream bank. So, I know Rachel had mentioned it before, but we will have an official pre-con meeting, and I don't want to speak out of line, Rachel, so you can stop me.
Yeah, I'll take that. We had invited the community or offered to the community to take a walk with us with the trees to have that conversation with us before construction starts. So right now we're looking at the first Wednesday in January, and we'll coordinate with the supervisor's office and they can pass that along to see who would be interested in walking the channel and specifically discussing the tree concerns.
Yeah, so that's kind of my wheelhouse, is like get you in the field, look at the trees, and I can dispute all day long why a tree should or shouldn't go, because I'm a certified arborist. I certainly don't want to remove all the trees. So, but you also have to take into account we have a playground there. So if we're going to impact a tree that could potentially decline and fall down in 5 years, you just can't take that risk. I think I'm done.
Thanks, John. So just again, for setting expectations, here's an example of a restoration project they did with the same group. So Wetland Studies as the designer and Resource Environmental Solutions as the contractor. On the left is the before condition. On the right is the post-construction photo immediately after planting. Over time, even this will grow in. It will not be as open once the trees, and we planted live stakes as well. But from a safety perspective, it's, we expect it to be much improved. And to the extent that we can on our projects, we try to maintain that canopy coverage and plant to close in that canopy coverage after we're gone. Any questions?
I think that there was at least 2 questions in the chat that haven't been addressed yet. I'll take the first one, then I might let Ellie jump in on the second one. The first one was about cost. The the construction estimate that we've agreed to and have gone into contract with Res on is 768,000, which when you look at industry standard for this type of work, you know, if you're in the $800 to $1,000 a linear foot, you're probably doing pretty good in terms of cost per linear foot. So I think based on the length of project and the construction costs that we are expecting, we're right in the ballpark of like industry standard for that. And then the second question, which I'll let Ellie grab, is about the upstream development on Madison Meadows and the farm pond that used to be there that's not there anymore.
So thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Ellie Cutting. I'm the Deputy Director for Stormwater and Wastewater, since I did not introduce myself earlier, which is part of the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services. So when it comes to regulating incoming development, we work really closely with our land development services partners. So if any of you have done an addition or added much to your house, you have to go get a permit, and that is through the Land Development Services Department. And so they're the ones who do the regulation, and they would have done the evaluation for the house that's in question. So we reached out to them to get some specifics about that lot, because it's only fair to you all for you to be able to understand how that happened. Land Development Services has limited powers and what they can regulate. So we live in what's called a Dillon rule state, which means that we only have the power that the state expressly grants to us. And until 2014, we did not have a stormwater management ordinance. So I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that plan. I don't know the date of when that plan was approved. But if it was prior to 2014, then we have additional laws now. They would have to comply with that. At the time, they did not. And then just keep in mind, we do live in a land rights state, so I don't have much power to tell you what you can and cannot do on your property, which works out well when it's your property. When it's your neighbor's property and they're doing something that you don't like, well, we have limited powers in what we can say they can and can't do. So we're going to work with Land Development Services. Jack and Rachel already have spoken with them, and they're starting to look into it. When we have the information, we'll share it with the supervisor's office to share with the people who are interested in that. In the end, that development has already happened. Once development does happen, Public Works, that's Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, we take care of the existing structures, which is what brought us to where we are today. We talked about the cost of this project. The cost of not doing anything becomes much more expensive, as you can see that erosion wasn't going to stop unless we did an intervention, and we're losing infrastructure in our easement. Protecting that infrastructure is a lot less expensive than replacing it after the erosion is worse than it is now. And that's just on what's affecting public infrastructure. It starts to affect the private properties more and takes down more trees if we don't get in and do our intervention now. And Jack has corrected himself. It's 708K, not 768K. And so, Sharon, thank you for your question about the pond, that amenity pond. So we'll get back to you with specifics on what Land Development Services saw when they reviewed that plan.
And actually, if I may, this is information. This is Sam, by the way, and this is information I've shared with Neil, because he had asked this to me personally, the same question about the pond that used to be there. And from my digging, it turned out that the subdivision plan for this was approved back in '96. And there is a note in there that talks about the removal of the pond and it needing to be drained via mechanical means like pumping and siphoning, instead of just cutting that dam and essentially allowing that water to rush out through the channel. And if I recall correctly, Jack, I think you may have had, I could be wrong, but you may have had some information about pre-existing conditions there that pointed to how, independent of that pond, there were already some issues there with sediment deposits, and basically that the pond was not the main cause of this work.
Yeah, the community probably knows the dates better than I do, but my understanding is around the 2003, 2004 timeframe is when the development started going in. So that's when they would have decommissioned the pond. And we have inspection documentation from the early 2000s, Rachel mentioned it earlier, of the downstream pond at Timberline Drive, where that stormwater facility, it's actually a regulated facility by the county, was already silted in pretty heavily. So I think the erosion had already been occurring throughout that channel corridor.
Yeah, this is Neil again. Follow up on what Sam and Jack just said. the note that Sam had passed on indicated that there was the pond was supposed to be drained via mechanical means, and then some work done in the pond, and then the pond led to refill. Sam, I think that's correct, right? And we have some folks in the neighborhood that remember the developer came in apparently and breached that pond and sent all of that pond at once into the channel. And that's one of the concerns, that, not without that knowledge, you'd be making assessments of the channel condition, assuming that it's just normal kind of day-to-day flow, as opposed to an entire pond that was breached. So that's one of the, again, one of the concerns that we have as far as the history goes.
And yeah, that we can certainly take a look again. As Ellie said, we can check back in with our contacts at Land Development Services just to see what more information we can find regarding that question.
I understand that there's, concerns and feelings towards what happened in the past, but we have, an MS4 requirement for, maintaining and improving existing stormwater infrastructure. So I mean, we can't fix what happened in the past. We can only try to make improvements to what's existing there today.
So I know, Amy, I see the questions that you put in, but like I said, unfortunately, we're working with a pretty tight time limit for this meeting. So we have 2 minutes left. So I thought now might be a good time to try to wrap things up, because there are additional resources that are available to everyone that I want to make sure that everyone's aware as they leave tonight. So Rachel was gracious enough with her team to put together a project website for this particular project. The link has been shared with many of you, but I can try to circulate that again following this meeting. And then also that project website contains a link to the first community meeting from October, which is also, contains a lot of good information for those of you who are willing to go check that out. And then let's see, the walkthrough in person, we will try to coordinate that through the email addresses that we have on file. As Jack and others have mentioned, I think that will be very helpful to just be able to see things in person, because we can talk about it looking at plans and such, but I think being in person would add a lot to the discussion. And then as for any additional questions, let's see, Amy, I will reach out to you by email, and we'll try to get you answers to the questions you posted here towards the end of the meeting.
There was a question about notification to Linda Marie. We sent a letter to the Clark's Landing HOA to the address that we had on file, and that was our initial attempt to reach out to the community and allow the HOA to organize a community meeting per se with the Linda Marie folks. We since have learned that the HOA is not organized, so our attempt to yeah, we wouldn't have known that though. We sent it to 2707 Clark's Landing Drive is the address that we have on file. So
and we can say hindsight's 2020. We're here now. We will answer your questions to the best that we can, put together the project website so you can be kept apprised as time moves along. I did paste in the link to that project website. So wish we could go back and have notified you right away. There is, I think, Rachel, is there documentation of the prior meeting that was held?
Yes.
Yeah, so we can share that with you as well, but just, let us know what your questions are and we'll deal with them now.
Yeah, Sam, what's driving the hard cutoff? Is there some folks that just can't go beyond 8 o'clock?
Yeah, that's right. We tried to set up the evening meeting to allow for others who couldn't attend the first one because that was in the daytime, but we got a lot of people on the call, a lot of scheduling conflicts, so we're actually 1 minute over now. So I think that I'll take that chance to wrap up the meeting. Thank you everyone for participating. Again, this is not the end of the discussion, but questions, we can still work through those. And I think many of you have my email address already, but I will put it in the chat so that you can contact me that way. So again, thank you for being here tonight, and we will conclude the meeting.
Thank you all.